Hey everyone, Hoosier Jedi here with another review for you. This time I'm talking about episode 4 of Avengers Assemble called The Serpent of Doom. First, quick apology for this coming out late. I got another crazy week at work, and yesterday, when I was going to do this video, just before I sat down to do it, a friend called who needed a hand with something, and well, if you saw my tweet, I mentioned that she's been having a hard time with things lately, so yeah. Anyway, so let's get right down into it. Overall, this is another good episode, like last time around. In fact, I'd say it's probably the strongest episode of the series so far. Now, granted, we're only 4 episodes in, but the show has definitely been improving as time has gone by, so I consider this to be a very hopeful sign. Now, in terms of what's going on with the characters this episode, it's not the most character-driven episode, but there are a lot of really nice little touches. The idea of Iron Man thinking of magic as simply science he hasn't figured out yet, that's a very long-standing tradition for the Avengers. It's really basically kind of Tony's default explanation for magic, how he deals with guys like Thor and Doctor Strange. He just chalks it up to science he doesn't understand. And actually, in the case of the Asgardians, he might really be onto something there. But that's a rather complicated topic. That's not really within the scope of what we have going on here. Really, I'd have to say, though, the main characterization thing going on this episode is Thor. And what we see here, highlighted very briefly, is the idea of basically fate versus free will. Thor basically believes that it's his destiny to fight this Midgard serpent and sacrifice himself to save the world from this monster. And Tony Stark is, of course, always going like, don't buy into that, mythology nonsense. We're in control of our own lives. We can figure a way out of this. And of course, Thor has been raised with this idea in his head his whole life, so he's not willing to just really go, oh, hey, that's a good point, Tony. Let's go with what you're talking about. No, he is very much, as I said, resigned, or accepting might be the better term for what's going on here. When he really thinks that the serpent is about to kill him, he even says, I go to Valhalla. And he just closes his eyes, and you can see that he's fully accepted that this is the end. And of course, at the end of this episode, we have that really nice moment where Tony and Thor basically go to Ulrich and throw the whole destiny thing in his face and walk out of there with big smiles on their faces. Very, very happy that apparently in this particular instance, the idea of free will has won out. Honestly, I kind of wish that they touched on that a little bit more, because it's a very interesting idea, and of course it's one that's basically one of the oldest in all of philosophy. Now, granted, this is a show that's ultimately aimed at young kids, so they don't want to go too deep into that. But I really would like to see a little bit more of this conflict between the two ideologies that Iron Man and Thor have. It certainly makes for a very interesting window into their relationship and their opposing viewpoints of the world. Although, at least by the end of this episode, they seem to have at least found themselves on the same page. And I do have to say that it's always fun when you're watching shows like this to hear Thor go, "Have at thee." I mean, that's just classic Marvel Comics Thor. And of course, it's overly dramatic, but I mean, this is a superhero show. These kind of things, you can't say that they don't do subtlety, because superhero stories are like any other story. Subtlety is perfectly usable in them. It just depends on the story and the circumstances and the writer. But also, at the end of the day, comics tend to be a little bit on the loud side, and there's nothing wrong with that. I'm just kind of pointing things out there. Anyway, one thing that I do have to say about this episode that really rather bothered me is that Tony seems surprisingly unknowledgeable about Norse mythology. Now, granted, not everybody really knows Norse mythology, but after Greek, it is probably the best known classical mythology in the Western world. And you'd think that a guy like Tony with a excellent education would at least have a basic familiarity with it. Or you think that since he's hanging around with a guy who basically calls himself the Norse god of thunder, that he might have Googled Thor legends at some point, or Norse legends. I mean, just the fact that he doesn't know this stuff just makes Tony seem like an unprepared idiot. And seriously, there are many charges you can level at Tony Stark, but unprepared idiot is usually not one of them. Anyway, earlier I mentioned that this episode gives us a few nice classic Thor moments. Well, we also get more than a little bit of very classic Doctor Doom, and he's going around blah blah blahing about history will judge him. That's very much par for the course from the Evil Dictator Handbook. And of course him trying to usurp powers that he doesn't understand, blathering on about how he's the only person fit to rule the world. All perfectly classic Doctor Doom. And I really liked him waving around that Asgardian weapon. It actually reminds me of a story from the Fantastic Four comics where Thor was dead at the time. Of course, this being comics, he ended up coming back. But basically, his hammer had fallen to Earth, and it was very reminiscent of the Thor movie, where a bunch of people in this little town out in the desert were going out there trying to pick the thing up just to see if they could. And of course, over the course of the story, Doctor Doom, stomps his way out there to go and say, like, okay, I'm going to go and claim Thor's hammer for myself. And I really like that during the course of the story, some of the superheroes even said to themselves, like, why are we fighting Doom? If he wants to go and try and pick the thing up, just let him. We all know he's not going to be worthy of it. But anyway, the great part is, of course, Doom gets over to the hammer eventually, grabs it, and he can't pick it up. And he tries and tries, and then he just says to himself, I can't believe it. I can't believe that I'm not worthy. And then he just sort of walks off. It's really actually unintentionally hilarious. And the Fantastic Four are kind of bickering among themselves, like, should we try and stop him? It's like, no, man, we've won. Just let Doom go. We'll take him down another time. Again, it was really a very fun story in the comics. I really enjoyed that, and it was nice seeing. I don't know if I exactly fairly say that it was referenced in this story, but I think that it was sort of there in spirit in a way, or maybe this episode just reminded me of that story from the comics, and I'm harping on it overly. Anyway, speaking of stuff from the comics, at the very end, we got to see Hawkeye mention calling Damage Control. Now, if you're watching Ultimate Spider-Man, you know that Damage Control is basically a corporation that cleans up after superhero fights. They're the guys who, put New York back together after it's been smashed all to hell so that it's ready to get smashed all to hell again the next week. So again, another nice little nod to the comics, and as I said, I believe that Damage Control was featured on an episode of Ultimate Spider-Man several months back. So, not really surprising, seeing as how this show is also written by the guys from Man in Action, who also do Ultimate Spider-Man, but still some very nice synergy there. But really, the thing I liked most about this episode was just the way the action was executed. It was great. I mean, the fight with the Midgard serpent in the middle of New York, I mean, it was wild, it was crazy, it was action-packed. It was really just everything you could really hope for from a superhero story, and it was done really, really well. So with that said, folks, I'm going to call it here. As I said, this is a really good episode. I had a lot of fun watching it, and I really think this show is continuing to pick up steam. So with that said, I will call it here, and as always, please take care and have a good one, and of course, also comment, rate, and subscribe. See ya!